So we own this show. This show. You want to the other commercial. I don't know. This show. That's what the need is. And so you want to not be in the way. Don't be a bully.
Yeah, it seems like we're trying to decipher Anne's comments about it. Like, is this something mandated by the state, or is she just trying to say it's beneficial to?
So you're not required. It's not. You just don't want to be a barrier to what's happening. And you support it. And have a softer way. So have that discussion. We can do that.
Great. That's really.
Finally got that yesterday. Waiting for
Okay, we're going to open this public forum, housing need analysis, and I'm going to turn it over to our city planner, Jacob Greichen.
Okay, this is the public forum about the city's current efforts on a housing needs analysis. I'm going to do a brief prime before having our consultants with FCS Group take over the helm. House Bill 4006, it regarded affordable housing, included funds to help cities called the Oregon Housing Planning Project. Per 2016 data, which was the most recent data available at the time, St. Helens 27 of its population was severely rent burdened, which means they paid more than 50% of their income on housing. That made us a prime candidate for this Oregon housing project. And we have not had really a housing needs analysis or building lands inventory for a long time. We've been using this old 1990s data. And so we knew we needed that. We were a prime candidate, and so even though it wasn't the best time of year, given all the development going on, we applied for it and got it. So this effort is being paid for essentially by the state of Oregon. So we got in the program. We got FCS Group, courtesy of the state. They're doing actually seven of these across the state, and so I'm pretty well versed in it. And what they're supposed to give us is an adoption-ready housing needs analysis that we can adopt into our comprehensive plan later on, and that's supposed to be done by June. We're a little bit ahead of schedule on that. So this is the last normally scheduled meeting outside of the adoption process, which will follow. So that's kind of what it is, why we're here, and with that, we'll turn it over to FCS.
we need a clicker.
You do need a clicker, I'm sure.
Oh, it's right here.
And then try to speak loudly into the mic. It has a hard time picking you up, especially people watching. Okay?
Great. Thank you. My name is Todd Chase with FCS Group, and with me is Tim Wood.
Tim?
We were fortunate enough to be chosen to do this update for the city and have a lot to talk about today. I want to get you up to speed on all the work that's been done. It's still a draft. As Jenny mentioned, we're ahead of schedule, so we have plenty of time to make changes and revisions as needed. And this is an opportunity to get your input on the findings and see if you have specific questions and see if there are other questions from the public as well. So we're here to answer those questions. But first, we're going to walk you through the process, the findings, and then we'll get to some of the recommendations.
Okay.
I think this will work. So I'll talk about the schedule. This work began in October, November, and as Jenny mentioned, we're supposed to be finished by June 30th, and we will be. What we intend to do is leave you with a adoption-ready housing element, which could be adopted into as part of your comprehensive plan as an update to the 1990s housing element that was last done. It's an opportunity to look at trends, market trends, and development issues facing St. Helens and your land use regulations, and try to reconcile your regulations with and your land supply with the projected 20-year housing needs. So to do that, there are basically 5 tasks that we've accomplished. After the kickoff, we did what was called a housing needs projection. Tim will talk about that in more detail. To do that, cities in Oregon are required to use the coordinated population forecasts that are prepared by Portland State University, and they do that and update that each year for every city to project their 20-year growth expectations, and they go beyond 20 years. We're only looking 20 years for this purpose. We convert that into housing based on ratios of people per household and different types of mixes of housing units and vacancy levels, and take that into account as part of the 20-year housing needs. Then we also do a buildable lands analysis, and we'll talk about that tonight as well. That is on the supply side, and so that looks at how much land you have inside your urban growth boundary, which is an imaginary line of where development can happen and shouldn't happen really within the foreseeable future. Properties inside the urban growth boundary are expected to urbanize over 20 years roughly, and that means public water, sewer, roads will be upgraded to handle development that's expected in those vacant areas. So we count up the land that's within that urban growth boundary, and we look at what allows of that land, what allows housing to occur, which land use zones allow housing. And so we tally that up, and we sort that by low, medium, and high density types of development. Low being single-family detached, medium being townhomes and duplexes primarily, and high really being 2- and 3-story apartments, or you could even be higher density than that, but it's typically 3-story apartments for high density.
Would cottage clusters fit in that high density?
That actually fits into probably the medium category. Okay. Yeah. Small lot and cottage clusters would be in that category. Okay. The 4th task is to look at the land needed for the housing. The housing growth projection from task 2 results in an acreage requirement for low, medium, and high density development. Then we compare that to the land available to reconcile the land inside the urban growth boundary with what's likely to be needed. Based on those findings, we come up with measures, policies that the city could consider to basically meet the need for housing over the next 20 years. Some cities need to revise their urban growth boundary to meet future housing needs. We found that not to be the case in St. Helens. So what we're working with here is how you can optimize the land within the urban growth boundary to meet the needs of the future by maybe making some tweaks to your zoning or to your development code.
What about transportation issues?
Yeah. Well, typically,
Master plan and that kind of thing.
yeah.
Do you look at that?
Not directly. What happens is once you have an urban growth boundary that's established, every 5 years or so, the city will update their master plans for transportation. The transportation system plan will be updated, the water plans, sewer. And when they do that, they take into account the projected capacity of the boundary. So they try to plan for future transportation facilities to handle the growth, and that gets adopted into your transportation system plan. I don't know when the last time your TSP was updated.
2010. So basically, the transportation planning is a separate process.
Well, I understand
From housing
that
needs.
2 different timelines really convolutes things that way.
It does. Everything's on different timelines. That's what we find, is that nothing's perfectly lined up at any point in time. But what we have to assume is that the urban growth boundary that the transportation system plan was working with then If it hasn't changed much, if it has changed, they'll have to revise the transportation system plan. And in the meantime, you have to live with intersections that are failing until that gets updated. So yeah, that's now some cities, if it gets so bad, they can have a moratorium on development. They've done that in Wilsonville in the past. When you have an intersection that's so failing, you can stop development. There's a water moratorium somewhere else we're working, right?
Yeah, I can't remember where now. I do remember that though.
Yeah, and so, that's in Banks, Oregon. So they have a moratorium on development currently because the water system's not sufficient to handle future development. So that's what happens when they get too out of sync. You can actually lead to those types of drastic consequences. So, but we're talking about housing. We're really talking about long-term planning issues to make sure that you're doing kind of all the things you should be doing to not be a barrier to developers and others that want to deliver housing in this community. You're basically providing code and your adequate supply of land and things like that so that the market can try to function within your urban growth boundary and the regulations you have. That's a big summary of the process. We can get into the findings. When you're actually asked to adopt something at the end of this project, which will be probably June, you'll probably be asked to adopt a resolution that actually accepts the findings from the housing needs analysis, which is in two parts. It has part one, which is a summary, which really gets to the heart of the findings and then begins to recommend some policy measures. Part two is a technical appendix, which is actually all the details to this. Mm-hmm. If you choose to accept this will become the findings for your housing element. The part that goes beyond that are what we call draft regulations, draft policy changes to your development code and to zoning and development maps and standards. That does not have to be adopted while you choose to accept the findings. That's on a separate lifespan. So if you agree with the findings, we hope you do, but if you do, that's great because that'll direct staff to begin to work with you in the coming months to consider some policy changes to implement the findings, basically. And so that's where this is all heading in June, just so you know. So why don't we go ahead, and if you don't have questions about the process, we did work with the Planning Commission as your advisory committee. We met with that group 3 times during the process. They had questions along the way. Staff also provided invaluable support and questions and feedback throughout the whole planning process, as did the Department of Land Conservation and Development staff who are trying to funded this project as well. And so we've gotten a lot of input over the course. We've also received letters from interested stakeholders that will be made part of the record as we revise the draft or fine-tune the draft study. Any questions about the process?
Obviously, in this study, there's a number of assumptions that you have to work within. And one of the assumptions is what a standard lot size is. If the city were to decide to, in order to build a home, you needed 2 standard lots as compared to the standard 1 lot. How does that affect this? Is once this put down, it's in concrete, you're dead in the water. The other thing is the urban growth boundary. If you want to change the character of your town, the density levels and things like that, I mean, you want to change those, but this thing would basically say this is what the density levels look like.
Okay.
Would that be the draft regulations that we could
Yeah,
adopt?
yeah. A lot of those details are going to be in the draft policy measures, which do not get adopted in June. They get additional discussion and refinement over the coming months. But the findings that we have here will basically begin to focus your attention on just a few areas that we think you need to focus on. And in this case, I think most of the things you're doing are great and compatible with what the trends are going to require for housing. So we're not going to be proposing radical or drastic changes to your existing policies. Might be a few things here and there that you consider about maybe having a cottage cluster zone or maybe having a minimum density requirement, but not wholesale changes to any of your code.
My real worry was the assumptions that you made to put this together. Something drastically changes in that. And one of the thoughts that we're hearing is the huge amount of problems with homeless in Portland and the huge exodus that's beginning.
Yeah.
That now really describes the requirement for housing outside of the Portland area.
Right.
That was
Right.
where, I'm more worried about can I change the assumptions, which then would change the report.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to have to accommodate a growing population almost everywhere in the state of Oregon. Cities are growing. You happen to be part of the metropolitan area, so you're getting overflow from Portland in particular, more so than they are in, say, LeGrand or Pendleton. But there's a need out there with low income residents and fixed income residents for affordable housing. You're not required to deliver a certain number of units as a result of this. We're just trying to make sure that you're not putting up barriers to development of affordable housing down the road.
Mm-hmm.
I was more worried about the supply of upper-end housing because the people want to leave Portland as compared to fully aware of the affordable housing and that problem. Now, I was more worried about the migration of, we'll say, acceptable housing in the Portland metro area, leaving that area because of a problem that's rising up.
Right. And that will push up your housing prices in the near term. And that's another reason why you want to make sure you have an adequate supply of land so that at least developers and others can deliver housing at different price points. You can't control the market, really, but you can just eliminate barriers to entry as a city.
Mm-hmm. So you're familiar with the need of what Oregon actually needs, right? I'm sure, and because I attended the leadership summit, and I think I remember the statistics was that we're projected we needed 30,000 units last year in Oregon, and we only did 17,000. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, of affordable units, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there will always be more demand than supply. There's no question about that. And all we can do is try to make sure that your development community is able to deliver housing at different types of housing throughout the community where you have it zoned, where you're planning to have it occur. You can, as policymakers, help kind of corral that development into locations that you think will be appropriate in different types of housing. In terms of you mentioned maybe some high quality, upper quality, maybe multifamily apartments could be here, as well as more mixed income housing as well. And so we just want to make sure we have opportunities for that.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we go ahead and into some of these details? I'm sure you'll have more questions as we roll through this. Tim, why don't you lead us through?
All right. Hi there. I'm Tim Wood. I did a lot of the analysis for this project, so happy to be here to talk to you about the data that underlies the assumptions that we made. Oh, sure. So, as Todd suggested, one of the first pieces that we needed to look at was the growth and how much we're going to have to accommodate in St. Helens. The gold standard for planning in Oregon is the Portland State University Population Research Center population growth figures. And according to that data, you're going to add 3,617 people to the St. Helens urban growth boundary over the 20-year time frame, so 2019 to 2039. This graph here shows how the housing stock looks today. So predominantly single-family detached homes, and slightly fewer townhomes and plexes, and then multifamily, which you can see is more or less in line with similarly sized cities. When you look at places like Monmouth, it's slightly more skewed towards multifamily because of the student population. So St. Helens looks about right compared to especially the county and the state. A lot of our assumptions underlying our analysis are that the housing stock is going to look similar. So in the future, that breakdown is going to look similar. So the vast majority of your new units will be single-family detached units. So that's just kind of an overview of how it looks today. And based on that information, we used the Portland State University population projections to assume that you'll add 1,621 new housing units to St. Helens in the next 20 years. That split is predominantly owner, so 861 owner units and then 760 renter units. And you can see also that breakdown is, again, predominantly single-family detached. And you can see the darker colors in the bars, that's owner units, and the lighter color, that's renter units. So among that single-family detached, a lot more owner units and significantly fewer renter. And then as you look at townhomes, plexes, and multifamily, a lot more renters. So that's more or less to be expected. So that's the baseline understanding of how the city is going to grow in the next 20 years. So that's the demand side of the equation. And then moving to the supply side, which is the buildable land inventory. So we took a look at all of the parcels inside of the St. Helens urban growth boundary, classified them based on whether or not they're developed or vacant, and then isolated the residential lots in particular or commercial lots that allow residential development. That's the first step, just developing that database. And then we removed different constraints like parks and open spaces, floodways, steep slopes, these kinds of things, just so that we're making sure that we're not counting land that would look vacant otherwise, which is constrained by a slope or a river or something like that. The results of that analysis are that St. Helens has 705 acres of developable residential land, which is a lot compared to many of the cities that we're looking at, so just frankly speaking. And you can see that the vast majority of that is just vacant land. There's a small assumption made about redevelopment, which is required by state statute, so we throw that in there. That's another 10 acres. And so we end up with a significant amount of land on the supply side. And then reconciling, or the residential land need analysis, is where we try and square these two things up. So that top bank of numbers you see, the land need, that's the demand from earlier, the 1,600 units, converted into acres based on some density assumptions that we made in conjunction with city staff and best practices. Then that second bank is, you'll recognize that 705 acre number from the buildable land inventory that we did. So there's your demand on the top, supply in the middle, and then at the bottom, that bank of land of numbers is the difference between the two. So you can see that you have nearly an additional 400 acres of developable residential land. You might notice that there's a deficit in high-density land, so that 8 acres in parentheses in the middle of the last bank of numbers, that indicates that there's not quite enough high-density land inside of the urban growth boundary, but you'll notice the last number before the total there, the 19 of commercial and mixed use, that could backfill the vast majority of that demand, so you're probably even good on that front. if we're being honest. So
Because commercial, we can put a high-density
precisely.
apartment complex.
Precisely, yeah. So well, wherever that's allowable in the city, we isolated those, found them, and said, let's say 15% of that land develops as residential or with a residential component to it. So that's that 19-acre figure there. So good news overall. You don't have to do anything crazy like trying to expand your urban growth boundary.
Crazy hard.
Crazy hard, yeah, that's true. So the next steps, as Todd suggested earlier, we're going to hopefully see you guys adopt this report. If you have any suggestions or edits, we'll make those in the meantime. And then hopefully also you'll adopt some of the policies that we'll discuss in the second half of this presentation as a way to help along, cottage clusters, for example, or other innovative ideas that the city might consider to help with the residential land situation here.
Back to crazy difficult.
Yes.
I'm going to just suppose first. Let's suppose we put the Western Bypass through here, which now means we have a lot more people want to come here. How difficult is it to get the growth boundaries changed? And it almost sounds like this one guy who's deciding how the whole state goes as compared to the individual towns.
Well, you know how fast Bend is growing, right?
No, I do not. Let's,
Well, Bend is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and Deschutes County is one of the fastest growing counties. And it's taken, I did their last urban growth boundary expansion before this one, and that was in 1999. And this last one that was for 500 acres, mostly for employment, not for housing. And then they realized, well, we need more land for housing now that we're growing again. And they started trying to do that in about 2005 or so. And it's taken till about 2 years ago to get that, and they still haven't developed any of it. But it's taken them almost 20 years to get that to the point of where you can turn dirt.
Well, I wasn't brought up in this state, and I've come from places that were able to expand cities in the Midwest and other places. What is the difficulty in changing an urban growth boundary?
Well, you first have to prove there's a need, and to do that, you have to prove that you can accommodate that growth anywhere else inside your urban growth boundary, and that's been done, and that's easy enough to do. But then when you're looking outside your urban growth boundary, you have to consider the farm use around it, the soil types, the public facilities, and then property owner and public opinions. Usually there's an appeal process to your decision to expand in the first place, which could take a year or two to get through. And so a lot of legal challenges, a lot of attorneys, the city's trying to hire their attorneys to fight it. And so we have a lot of land activist groups in the Northwest, Thousand Friends of Oregon and others, that will really go to the mat to make sure that you're doing everything you possibly can before you expand your urban growth boundary.
Property owners also have the decision of whether to annex into the urban growth boundary or not. Is that correct? Is that still a policy? It was 30 years ago.
No. Now they really don't have that opportunity. If they're inside the urban growth boundary, they can
annex
petition
in.
to be part of the city.
Yes.
Yes, they can annex
But if
in.
they're outside, there's now a new process where they have to be kind of included in an urban reserve area before they get included in urban growth boundary, and so that takes another step. And so Oregon really makes it difficult. And I've worked all over the country in these types of matters, and this is probably the hardest state to do urban growth outside of the city.
And I know
other than maybe Hawaii.
that occurred maybe 30 years isn't the right number. Maybe it was more like 40. I'm not certain.
Yeah.
But it explains the checkerboard kind of pattern on the outlying areas where some residents said yes and others said no.
No.
And there was in many situations it's almost like islands have occurred
Yeah.
in that area.
Yeah.
So that isn't a part of a process now.
No, it's not. And
It's-
and as Tim showed you in the numbers, overall, you have a nice cushion of land that's inside the urban growth boundary. Whoever did the planning, 20 years ago here, they gave you a good cushion, and so that's good news. Now you can build out kind of very strategically. You probably don't need to revisit this issue for probably another, even if they did build the West Side bypass, another 10 years.
So this is really an opportunity then. We know we don't need to expand our urban growth boundary based on employment lands, commercial and industrial. We have a lot of industrial. Commercial, we'll kind of have to see. The problem is there's no commercial lands in proximity to the UGB. And residential-wise, we're good. The reason I call this an opportunity is we have this surplus, and now we can, after this housing needs analysis, look at our policies, create some policies to make land efficient for the next 20 years and beyond.
But inside the just for clarification, inside the urban growth boundary, it becomes a choice of the voters in the city to annex that property in. Is that correct?
No. That is our charter says that annexations are supposed to go to a referendum, but there was a state law passed a couple years ago that said, notwithstanding what your charter says, you can't do that.
Really?
Whose you can't?
Cities.
The city.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, given certain criteria. So the last several annexations we haven't had it put to voters based on that new state law.
What about a petition? Can a property owner petition if they're in the urban growth boundary to
Jacob, people
annex
are
into the
They're
city?
writing stuff down right now. You've got it. They're doing homework.
That's fine. I think probably 100% of all of our annexations in the last many years have been via petition.
And what if you're an island? What if your property happens to be in the urban growth boundary, but is not would have to hopscotch over a area that is not in the city?
So you want a
and
cherry
you
stem?
annex into the city. How
Yeah,
does that
cherries
work?
do.
Well, we're getting a little off topic. I
No,
don't
we
know
aren't.
how
I want
much.
to know this question. I think it's a pertinent question.
Okay. Like with all the annexations that we've had, we talk about when you can legally annex, and it must be adjacent to city limits, not in another municipal jurisdiction, and adjacency can mean separation by a road or a body of water.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sure.
And I think that is on target because I get asked that question quite often where I own property.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good.
Your microphone, Keith.
Is it up to the council? I mean, we can actually put people in the city if there's a need for it, right?
Yeah, there is an annexation that's forced, and I know it hasn't been done in St. Helens for years and years, so I don't have a lot of experience with it. But Councilor President Morton mentioned islands,
Right.
and some of the islands that we have are these pieces of property that are surrounded by city limits on 3 sides, 4 sides, and I believe there is law that can force that in.
If it's needed for city services around the rest, yeah, you can force it in.
Yeah, there may be a need or not. I'm not familiar enough to be able to articulate the details, but
A council can. We've just always decided not to, just.
The council's been pretty nice about that for
So
a long
the
time. yeah.
original question was, though, how hard is it to expand the UGB? And I talked to Senator Johnson. You're familiar with who that is, right? We wanted to move it an eighth of a mile to Bennett Road to maybe get 2 stoplights, one at Millard and one at Bennett, because Bennett's a very difficult intersection. She said it would be like me turning into a ballerina.
But she's got an artificial hip, so she's on her way. It's almost like it's going to take the second coming. But this ends up, it's peculiar state law to Oregon. Okay. As compared to a, say, real physical problem.
It's unique to Senate Bill 100, passed in 1973, and it's unique to Oregon for sure.
Is that bill tattooed on your arm so you know what it is?
The text right there.
Well,
We'll allow you to continue on with the second half of your.
okay. So thank you for these questions, and again, if anybody else has questions along the way, please jump in. We'll probably have some opportunities for the public input too, I hope.
So Todd, I just want to interject briefly on the policy discussion, and I think they alluded to this. So what we'll do, probably pretty quick after we have this document, is adopt it into the comprehensive plan. Then we can refer to that when we make zoning changes and other things. So we have something to say, well, it should be this zoning because of this. Now, what we're going to talk about are some of these policies, and these policies are something that we're going to work on later, and probably 2020, once we get some of these other planning projects worked up, to look at things to make better use of the land given this housing needs analysis. The important message I want to get across is this isn't the end discussion of the policies. We'll discuss some things today, but between now and when we start working on it, there may be other things that staff brings up, that the community brings up. So just keep in mind, this isn't the be-all, end-all for the policy.
This is a basic draft, and then we can do draft regulations, so tweak it as you go.
Not exactly.
Yes, we can. Not exactly.
Jacob does it all together. You can't just wing it.
But this is conceptual stuff. We're not getting into.
We'll have time to mash it out.
Yeah.
And-
Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start and Tim will chime in too. These policy measures are really for discussion at this time. There may be other policy measures you want to explore. There may be other policy measures the community presents. We can talk about those as well. Cities around the state are all doing different things. Everyone is unique. What we're bringing to you tonight are just a few things that you might want to kind of a starting point for your discussion. The first item is a minimum density standard requirement. Currently, you have minimum lot size requirements that go with zoning. So R5 zone would have a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, R7, 7,000, that type of thing. And that's fine for the lower density zones, maybe even some of the medium density zones. But when you get to some of the higher density zones, and as we showed in the analysis, you have a kind of a shortfall of high density land, vacant high density land, that can be made up with your commercial and mixed use properties, which is good. You're lucky there. But there's no real minimum density requirement for developers that want to build on that land. So if they want to build a small lot cottage cluster on a high density zone land, they might be able to. And so that's one thing you might want to clamp down on, is if you have some minimum requirement in terms of either density. This is planned to go up to 24 units an acre. We would expect you to at least be 50% of that, something like that, so that at least you make sure you're optimizing the land that's already within the urban growth boundary and served by infrastructure. That's why this is being talked about. Anything you want to add on this one, Tim?
Just at the planning commission, we discussed this with the planning commission, and there was a little reluctance with regards to this policy. They liked the idea of letting the market sort it out. So that was the input we received back in March on this.
So right now we don't have a minimum density standard. We have a maximum standard. So if someone had a 10-acre piece of land vacant that's zoned our high-density apartment residential and they wanted to build one house, there's nothing preventing them from doing that. Now, if they wanted to divide it, we do require a redevelopment plan, and that just makes sure the house is placed in an efficient spot to ensure some efficiency for future division. But we don't have the minimum density. But like they had mentioned, in our experience, usually, and I can't think of an example where someone didn't try to get as much reasonable density as possible, and so that's why the discussion about the market usually kind of works that out. Was had.
A question on definition of markability. This week, anything I can build, I can charge $10,000 a square foot. I've got a lot of interest in this ground. Next week, 50 cents is high. How do I define what's market driven? Because obviously it's time dependent. And 2 weeks from now, I have a real mess. Is there some...
You know, what we tend to do is we tend to look at like the last 5 years of permitting history in a city to see how the developers are addressing housing density and development on land that's zoned R7 or R5 or multifamily, and that average over the last 5 years tries to tell us what the market has been doing recently. But we can't predict the future.
No, but you have a certain time period as compared to what I can sell for today.
Right. Yeah, good question. So that's one, might be a lower priority given that the developers have been trying to push the density usually as high as they can to get their return on land investment when they do a project. It tends to be the case, but we've had other communities where there's a lot of high-density land and no low-density land, so the developers are building low-density housing on the high-density land because they allow that, and that's not the case here. This one is about duplexes, and right now duplexes are conditional allowed use on the R7 land, which is more of the lower density single-family neighborhood land. This would basically be a change in the policy to allow duplexes as an outright permitted use now in the R7 zones. What some cities have done is they've restricted that to corner lots. So duplexes work great on corner lots because you tend to have a separate entrance on each street frontage, which seems to work well with the design and the compatibility of the overall neighborhood. So you could take it that far, or you could take it further and then allow duplexes outright as long as other conditions are met, like lot size and certain setback requirements and things like that. So this would allow you to get a little more density out of your existing lower density zones and allow another housing type to be delivered that's considered to be a little more attainable to kind of families earning $50,000 to $75,000, $80,000. So that's that one. Any questions about the duplex idea? How did the Planning Commission feel about this one?
There was a little reluctance on the part of the Planning Commission, in particular concerns
You
about...
have to pull the bike towards you.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
In particular, with regards to neighborhood character and preserving that in R7 zones, and then also just support generally for the existing regime that allows this conditionally. So you'd bring it before the Planning Commission and state your case. So they supported the existing regime with regards to this.
So, in our apartment residential highest density, duplexes are permitted outright. You don't have to go through a planning process. In our R5 zoning district, permitted outright. In R7, they're conditionally permitted. So the first thing you need to go is go through a conditional use permit, public hearing with the Planning Commission, allows extra scrutiny for the proposal. And then in our R10, our lowest density district, they're just not allowed at all. And so the question is, in that middle one, do you maintain that conditional use permit process or not? And it's one of those, well, which way do you go? You know, I've done a lot of those, and you know, I don't know if there's been a lot of compelling testimony in those processes that would have really changed the outcome that much. But the Planning Commission feels that we should maintain that process, at least in that zoning district. So the question is, do you want to do that, or do you want to make duplexes easier in R7?
A question on a duplex. Definition. I built a home that looks like a single-family home, and it is for 2 years, then I divide it in half. Is that a duplex?
Not technically until you meet certain fire code requirements for the walls between the units, and other types of requirements probably need to be met as well. But that's the one separator I've noticed between what you consider to be an accessory dwelling
Yep.
and a duplex. It's
Would-
kind of the firewall.
When you say divide in half, you mean the property or the house?
The house. Because as a contractor, I can see putting in a wall that has all the fire requirements and all of that. And I built it large enough knowing I was going to do that in 2 years, so I was allowed to build this home. Then I put in the firewall. Is that now a duplex? Or is that one of those smoky things we really don't know?
It basically comes down to a duplex is a building with 2 dwelling units in it, from a very primal standpoint.
At the time it's built.
At the time it's built, but you know, if you have a 10,000 square foot house and someone wants to convert it to a duplex, that's still possible.
Is that a duplex, though, or is that...
It becomes a duplex.
It could be. I mean, I've seen them also become condominiums. So it's a little slightly different twist on it, but we've seen that, you know, things get converted to condos that way. So it may not
Legit,
technically be
yeah,
a duplex.
an auxiliary dwelling unit. Could be legit.
Right.
If you want to.
Be an auxiliary.
So my answer for me, just speaking for myself to your question, would be I like to keep it the same. I think the Planning Commission actually does keep a fairly decent perspective because they do allow some. I've seen them in R7 and typically on a corner lot,
Right.
like you said.
Yeah.
So
How do the rest of you feel about that?
I probably not as positive about that. I feel that just after watching the Planning Commission for 6 years, I feel like people that want to do stuff with their property jump through a lot of hoops. It's really not friendly. Some people don't even apply. I think there's people out there that are detoured by the process. And maybe they choose a different lot because it's not allowed.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, is that I see that it just,
And I think if the
I like it when it's a staff decision because I think that the planning staff takes everything into account and is not prejudiced by anything else. They're looking at what's best for the land and whether it's a suitable use. But when it comes into this room, if the neighbors all come in and they all complain, it doesn't happen. No, you know, that's just the reality. And I just like, my question is that fair? Is that the way planning works? And is that an acceptable way for planning to work?
what do you think?
I don't think it's acceptable. I think that if you live in a neighborhood that nobody shows up, so you get to do what you want, But if you live in a really awesome neighborhood and everybody shows up and then you don't get to do anything you want.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to say, for an example, like Zoll, would you like to live in Elk Ridge or the other development, and then all of a sudden we changed this rule, and then you got high-density duplexes using your two outlets more than likely, because they all have to link together. I just thrown that out there as an example. I'm not trying to pick on any one person.
Right, but that's
But
it's a perfect
That's what
example.
they showed up for.
But that's the
was
perfect
duplex.
example is that housing development. But then you look at the one that's over on Bar Avenue. If you've been up there on that street at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, you can't get, a Prius down that street because there's not even close to enough parking. And so, I mean, I understand why people don't want the duplex because they get the skinny street and they get the no parking and everybody's got 3 cars. So, I mean, there's got to be a happy medium with what you require for parking when you cram that many houses together.
In terms of conditions.
Yeah, conditions, I mean,
That's-
permitted use with conditions
That's
allow.
what I see the planning commission's role is implementing conditions that are very real.
Right, that make it work.
Yeah, the parking, those kinds of things. So if we're leaning towards maximum density in certain areas, it certainly makes sense to me. But specifically with the planning commission having a good idea of what conditions will be in terms of transportation, livability, street size, all of those things.
So,
You asked how we felt.
yes.
I'm telling you.
Leaving it alone is
So your status quo then is
Yeah.
okay. What about Lock and Topaz?
You've been here the longest.
The question about livability and people having 3 cars and parking, that says we stay away from some of this really high density. And that now goes to the halfway smarts of the planning commission, seeing what the total picture looks like as compared to just describing the building.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Councilor President Morton, I think, said it well. So if it's permitted outright, you just have your basic standards. Duplex, you have to have 4 parking spaces, you have to meet these setbacks, you have to have this lot coverage. Okay, that's like it is good, approved, moves on down the line. With the conditional use permit process, it does give the commission the ability to impose other conditions for the purposes of livability and stuff like that. And so that's the question, is if you want to maintain that process. And I got 2 of you, I think Topaz seems on
Yeah.
board with that. Keith is tacit in his response.
This town is so hard because of all the geographical issues and other issues and whatnot. It's every lot is like a separate situation. And it's fine if everybody knows everything, but that's the problem is a lot of times they look at something and all it is a lot on a flat piece of paper and you make a decision based on that. And that's not right, so I don't know. I don't know what the real answer is.
Okay, well, I think we got the read we need, at least at this point on this one.
So I would like to let these guys continue on with their
Oh.
presentation, because
We'll keep going.
we even want public comment in here, I think, so.
Well, I'm sure this will generate some conversation about parking. So what we've noticed in our work is that there is an undersupply of both market rate apartments, good quality market rate apartments in St. Helens, as well as the affordable. And what happens is parking is very, very expensive to deliver, especially with apartments, especially if you're trying to tuck it under the buildings and things like that. It could be as high as 20, 30, 40,000 a space per space.
Wow.
And that can add a lot to the cost of a dwelling and to the rent of a dwelling. So but the city already, the code already allows the developer to submit an independent parking study which could justify a lower parking number of stalls than what the code might require currently. But that requires the developer to hire that traffic engineer, go through the process, do the study. It becomes kind of more of a cost to the developer, and they might just give up on saying, "Oh, let's go to a community that allows lower parking requirements for multifamily." Now, banks, any developer who gets loans has to go through a bank. Banks are going to require apartments to have a certain number of parking spaces, typically as part of that development, off-street parking. In case something goes wrong, they're going to take over the property and they're going to want to make sure it's marketable. So there at least has to be a number of parking spaces to make it marketable, and so to make the banks are interested in providing loans for it. So what we've talked about here is reducing, or at least allowing, a reduced parking requirements for parking for multifamily, and this could be either through a third-party study that the developer provides with the traffic engineer that demonstrates why this unique project won't generate as much parking requirements as your code requires it to. I've seen other thresholds used by the Institute of Traffic Engineers for multifamily buildings, which will vary the number of parking spaces required depending on the type of multifamily dwelling we're talking about, whether it's a studio or whether it's a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom. Varies. That can drive the number of parking that's required. So you could, they could easily take that information and maybe justify a lower number of parking spaces for that particular development than what your code might require, without going through too many hoops. So this would just, I guess, allow that option to developers to provide lower numbers of parking for multifamily developments than what your code requires. I think this would still be this might still be a conditional approval. I'm not sure how far we take that, but that's what this is about.
Well, it seems to me that if you tuck parking underneath, you're saying at the high cost.
Right.
Well, does not the contractor or the builder get his money back by acquiring more land, which would probably equate to parking spaces outdoors and create more living areas in that space? I really don't think those were fair numbers when you said, it's more expensive.
Well, that's assuming they can buy more land,
Yeah, okay.
that there's land for sale.
Yes.
Yes, I'm assuming that.
Back to assumptions. It used to be I worked down at the mill, so I walked there. We didn't need a parking spot, and the old cities show that. Then we had a single car. Then we had a single car per person. What is the projection of a typical apartment for the use of cars? Now, I also got to have a place to put my boat or my RV. Any idea on the projections from this study of what the parking for the population is going to be?
This study doesn't project the parking like that, but I've seen other studies that show within 10 to 20 years, the number of cars per household will go down because of car sharing programs that are going to become ubiquitous. So those studies are out there.
Just curious, how much more do you guys got to cover? Quite a bit?
Only one more, I think. Two more.
Two more.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the planning commission didn't seem too interested in creating additional provisions other than what's in the code as noted on the slide. They were pretty wary of it, especially because we're so much of a commuter town and car is king and probably will be for the foreseeable future here.
I think so.
Yep.
So the question is, do you agree with the commission on that?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Okay.
all right.
That's fair. Tim, do you want to talk about this one? You were there at the commission.
Sure. I think that the city's been talking a lot about the cottage cluster concept for a while anyway, and so this is an opportunity for the city to codify it and just allow it as a use and simply develop the standards that would exist for cottage clusters. So this is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's an affordable, small, dense mode of development that's fairly accessible for cities of all sizes. So this is just an opportunity for that policy to be developed. And the Planning Commission this was definitely their favorite one.
I think this one's probably a slam dunk since we have been talking about it.
So you're saying 24 units per acre, is that correct? Density, lot size density?
This is just an example that DLCD provided. It's a nice picture with like nice statistics. It doesn't have to be that way at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just you saying go forth and work on the cottage cluster rules, and then we'll work out densities and all those numbers later on. This is just, do you want to work on cottage clusters? And the council's pretty much said that in the past, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is a slam dunk.
Good.
It's guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, developers typically have to go through a planned development program process and all kinds of conditions, and it creates again, a big challenge, costly challenge. And this is a market type that, again, can deliver housing at attainable price point. So it's a good one to have.
So ultimately, what I think we're going to end up doing is, a lot of our big, large properties for the conventional subdivisions are being subdivided. And so, but we have a lot of these medium-sized parcels. And the idea is to create rules that allows higher density on those. And the cottage cluster is a good example of it.
So this last one is about properties that want to be annexed into the city. And currently, when the city annexes a property, I believe it goes from a rural, suburban, unincorporated residential county zone to either a R10 or R7 zone, which is fairly low density, by matter of course. This policy regulation change could allow the property owner to propose and for the city to consider a higher level of density on those annexing properties if certain conditions are met. And you can specify what those conditions may be. But they tend to be things like how big is this parcel? Is it proximate to a higher level street that has sidewalks and maybe even, transit or some commercial services within a 1,000 feet or a walking distance of that property? Things like that. So if these conditions are met, it's more likely that you would allow, an R5 type of zone or something else.
What about also like wetlands? Sometimes we have good chunks of property that are owned by one person. They want to sell it as a whole, and then you have wetlands in it, and then you can do a lot of R7, R10, but there's those areas that just like an R5, like 3 fit perfectly.
Right. Yep.
That may be something too. But a good example of this is the Zoll annexation. They had a comprehensive plan of this RSUR as noted up here, and the debate was R5 or R7.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm glad we had that because you all had that case study right in front of you. So what the code says is you normally go R7 or R10. You can go R5 or AR, the higher density zones, under certain circumstances. Basically, what the idea here is we clarify and perhaps enhance those circumstances to say when we go to the higher zone. So it's clear for all decision makers because right now it's kind of, I don't even know what some of that means. How does that guide? And so it's a better guide and may facilitate higher density zonings when appropriate. And those last two words are very important.
Sure. I mean, I can see we talked about mixed uses a bunch, and we have. What would be? You could even go to a smaller center than R5 with a cottage cluster, couldn't you? 'Cause they do their own taxable lots, right?
Yeah, a cottage cluster will probably have a higher density than your conventional
Okay.
development.
All right. Yep. So
Okay.
And this was staff driven because obviously we like to have our plans to be good guides, and this one's so gray. It's like, well, this is probably one we should probably improve. Planning Commission agreed. We hope you do too.
Okay.
I don't know. You guys agree?
I'm assuming that's a yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Those are all the measures we had tonight to talk about. I don't know if you want to take some, we'll take additional questions from council or public.
The question I have over all this is basically the assumptions, and there's a drastic change in something, large road, bomb crater, or whatever. It almost seems like we've got rules down that you almost can't change because of the mechanism that's in place. Is that a good overview of how the state is basically regulating every town with the overall rules?
Well, I think what we're finding in Oregon is that because planning is sometimes difficult and you don't have time to always be proactive, some cities may not be updating their codes to keep current with the market trends. Sometimes they may not have enough land in their urban growth boundary that's zoned for housing. So housing land costs are going up, and that could be causing housing prices to increase rapidly.
Absolutely.
So those are the reasons why we're kind of, this is an opportunity to kind of come back. It's been a long time since you've even done this.
And we get that. But really, I get where I think you're going with this. When a guy buys a piece of property, let's say it's 10 acres, and he goes ahead and he puts city sewer and water and underground power, and he paid what's at the time seemed like $1 million, seemed like a lot, but now he's 2.5 million into it, and you come and you got, okay, I get R10, I'm only getting X amount of lots.
Right.
Next thing you know, those lots are $100,000 per lot.
Yeah.
Or more,
More.
and then you're building just a fairly decent quality home at 100 a square foot.
Yeah. 100.
So
200.
yeah,
Yeah.
So that's the affordable is already at the dirt phase, is already out of the equation.
Yep.
At the dirt phase. So when we're talking affordable housing, that's where it starts, and it needs to be figured out. We cannot legally forgive or relieve SDCs because they're system development charges.
Yeah.
We can't. So what?
Right.
Our hands are tied.
Yep.
It's up to the state to kind of either stipend or give each cities the allotment of 13,000. We have 13,005 population.
Yeah.
Is that a $1.3 million stipend that we can spread out through developments? Is that how the state needs to regulate this for affordable housing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The league has been begging them, the League of Oregon Cities, to look at this. And it's frustrating because this is all the little cities, and they're at the state level and they're doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
They don't deal with it daily. They don't. We do.
I've got one other, good
Go ahead.
point. And I've got one question. I keep hearing cottage cluster. What are other options other than cottage cluster? Are there courtyard kinds of concepts and those kinds of things? Or are we just talking about cottage clusters? Is that?
Well, anything with more than 5 units in a development would be considered to be multifamily, typically, and that could be, a courtyard arrangement.
Okay.
So
it isn't just confined to what a definition of cottage cluster is. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. That's all I needed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And Councilor President Morton, we already have some other ideas about these things that we'll tackle, and it could be the courtyard apartments
Well,
and
yeah.
other things too.
As long as
So
there's some flexibility built into this,
Yeah.
and we aren't, confined to terminology. That, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
since this is our last meeting, I want to thanks FCS Group for helping us through this.
Yes, thank you.
Great to
Yep.
be here.
You guys are great.
Great city.
And
Thank
so the 7 cities that we've seen are the ones that you guys, everybody reviewed this year in the beginning, I think with the
Get a
chart?
comparison.
Those weren't all the ones we're working on now.
No?
That's just a random sample of like
Okay.
All
cities.
But how many
I'll-
are you,
Like us.
how many are you doing throughout the state? Did you
7.
say when you-
Should.
7.
Seven
Oh, okay.
total, and
It
then
just
one
happened
county.
to be on your pie chart, 7, and then Oregon as a standard.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
why I asked.
right.
Yeah, we probably should.
So,
Very-
Rick,
Would've saved this.
we do need to allow for public comment on this if anyone wants to speak on it.
Right.
So,
So, do you want them to hang them out up here for questions? Or,
We can come back.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now it's time to have public comment on housing needs analysis. If you've sat through and listened to this.
Shauna Strop Harrison, St. Helens, Oregon. I'm late to this and I apologize, but I did read over some of the 94-page document that was available. You talk about annexing and making more density. What about livability? I feel like that nothing was really, there wasn't a lot in there in regards to how we're going to support the growth and how we're gonna, we talk about housing needs, but we're not evaluating the living needs in regards to how are people gonna afford to live in some of these homes with the rising cost of everything, utilities, water, things of that nature. So that was just something I was kind of concerned, wondering, like, as this density and annexing goes, what do we do to go with it? I mean,
Well, and I think this housing needs analysis is more of a study of the available properties and the densities of the properties. And the answer to your question was what I just finished talking about. Only thing I see is the state, even at development, power and sewer, that's driven. I mean, that's just the cost of PUD crunches their numbers. Their employees get a 3% increase. The trucks cost brand new money. Trust me, we got a 75% increase in our lights on our power poles as a city a little over a year ago. Weren't happy, but it was a cost of things just going up. And the answer to that question, I have no idea. But the development, by the time you buy dirt, you put in all your sewer, and then you start paying SDC charges for every house you build. You're in your permit, you're already into it for $150, and then you spend $100 per square foot for just an average home. It's $300,000 later.
so the price disparity in regards to affordability is huge. So homes that are listed under 300,000 are getting multiple offers, but new homes like the development you guys approved on Emerald Meadows at 350 are sitting. So that $50,000 is it's the breaking point for a lot of households, especially looking at the price point of where our income level is in St. Helens compared to the other counties you guys have compared in your 94-page sheet about different, when I was looking through the cost analysis, looking through how much people are bringing into the county, what the household, the average age, all of that. So it poses the question in regards to me, the hugest question, I'm down here all the time, is because of livability. I see the livability of our community eroding, and I feel like we're bringing more and more people in here, but we're not having more and more resources.
Well, you kind of being a realtor are part of the problem because my house should not be worth $260,000.
It's not my problem, just like the
$260,000. Let me finish. It built in 2002, and it shouldn't be, but it is because the market is driven by those the 1,200 three bedroom, 1,200 square foot, 2-bedroom, not even quite 7,000 square foot, built in 2002, nothing spectacular, built through Community Action Team, as a matter of fact, sweat equity program. Very low cabinetry. It's worth $260,000.
that I don't control the value of what houses are going for.
The market does.
The market does, just like you said about the
So,
PUD.
you know, you're yelling at us, and we don't control that market.
But I'm not yelling at you. I'm just letting you
No
know
idea.
that when you guys are looking at making more density, because that's what you guys are looking at doing, and you guys are approving these
Yes.
developments, which is why we have these meetings and why you guys talk to the planning commission and why everybody's sitting up here and why you guys have got a position up here at the post, is because these are the questions that people have, and this is the thing that you people, as the people that live here, are also concerned about. So as far as the market, I don't have any choice on what the market bears in regards to the supply and demand. And it's all about supply and demand.
Neither do we.
I don't think that your
With zoning.
basic
Even with zoning,
home,
we don't.
but you guys are getting to prove these densities, and you guys are increasing density. You guys are approving planning commissions to do things and developments to make smaller parcels than what were normal on the board. You guys are approving those things.
Property management companies have driven up rent prices because I know people that used to manage their own rentals and they don't because property managements will get their price up there.
That has nothing to do with you guys bringing in more development.
Affordable living. It absolutely does have to deal with affordable living. What you are discussing right now, your anger is coming at us. And it's
not anger.
it's frustration, and I get it. But
I have
it's
no
really
hostility in
not,
my voice.
It's really not the density. We don't drive the market. We can.
That's why you guys are down here, though. You increase density and annexing properties.
Sean, I think this will help. So
thank you.
in the context of the housing needs analysis, and there's a broad spectrum of issues that a city has to face. But in the annexation discussion, what we're talking about is policies to help us better determine where the higher density should go. And so we're not just going to put it anywhere willy-nilly, but there'll be a better guide to when it's appropriate and when it's not. And in the spirit of trying to preserve livability in the various neighborhoods as appropriate. So I think some of your concern is built into the discussion, not everything, because your thoughts are very comprehensive and over the wide spectrum. But I think some of what we discussed is at least addressed in concept. We're going to work on these more after we adopt the housing needs analysis, and so stay tuned for that. But hopefully that kind of makes you feel better.
The housing and needs analysis is just a rough draft, and then we can do, with people like yourself, developers, we will be doing draft regulations is what we were discussing at first, it is, so to speak, kind of tweak as you go.
Yeah, this is about creating rules to follow. We're not deciding to change any rules tonight.
Can you turn your mic?
We're trying to having an outside source tell us if we change our rules, what makes sense. That's all they're doing is giving us, it's just a study.
Well, and the solution, as you guys have wrote right up there, is considering allowing higher density zoning for annexing properties with more clearer conditions are met.
You cut the tail end of the whole thing. It's been going on since.
So I know, and I apologize. And I do try to come down here more than you would probably all like.
Right,
but-
and if you look at the last statement, it says the planning commission's input to that is the study results were consider that, and the planning commission said have concerns with neighborhood character and livability, and they went on at length about making those changes and what they do to neighbors. So this is what the consultants say, what the planning commission says, and now it's us hearing it.
Yep.
So it's not a decision.
Okay. Well, I look forward to more information in regards to it. I think it's something that's important for all of us as we continue to grow.
Okay. Other public comment? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to adjourn. Public hearing's over. Okay, we're going to take just a couple-minute break, 3 minutes, because I need to give Kathy just the ability to reset Granicus, and then we'll go into our